This is a reading from The Little Flowers of St. Francis. Six, on patience. He who would bear tribulations patiently for God's sake would quickly attain to great grace and would overcome this world and already have one foot in the other world. Whatever a man does, whether good or evil, he does it to himself. So you should not be angry if anyone offends you, but you ought to have compassion for his sin. Bear with patience the offenses which your neighbor commits against you for God's sake, for your neighbor's sake, and for your own sake. The readier someone is to bear tribulations and offenses for God's sake, the greater he is before God, and no more. And the weaker he is in enduring tribulations and sufferings for God, the less he is before God, and he does not know what God is. If anyone says something bad to you, help him. And if someone says something good to you, offer it to God. But if he says something bad to you, you ought to help him by saying something worse about yourself. If you want to do your part well, do it badly, and the other's part well. That is, praise his deeds and words and criticize your own. And if you want to do your part badly, do the contrary. So when someone competes with you, lose if you want to win. For in the end, when you think you have won, you will find that you have lost. Therefore, the way of salvation is the way of losing. We are not good bearers of tribulation, because we are not good seekers of spiritual consolation. For he who would faithfully work in himself and on himself and for himself would easily bear all things. Don't offend anyone. And if someone commits an offense against you, bear it patiently for the love of God and for the remission of your sins. For it is much better to endure one serious offense without complaining than to feed 100 poor people for many days and to fast every day for many days until the stars come out at night. What good is it for a man to despise himself and mortify his body with fasts and prayers and watchings and disciplines and not be able to endure a single offense from his neighbor, for which he would receive a greater reward than for those things which he bears by his own choice? And this is a warning sign, because his hidden pride is put to the test by the insult which he receives. Men expiate their sins more by bearing tribulations without complaining than by weeping. Blessed is he who always has his sin and the goodness of God before his eyes, and who patiently bears all tribulations and trouble, for he can look forward to a great consolation. Blessed is he who does not seek or desire any consolation from any creature under heaven. A man should not expect God to reward him if he is humble and calm only when he is satisfied with everything. He who always keeps his sins before his eyes will not weaken in any tribulation. You should receive every good thing you have as from God, and all bad things as from your sins. For if one man were to do all the good that all the men in the world have done, are doing, and will do, nevertheless, if he really looked within himself, he would find himself always opposed to his own good. A certain friar said to him, "What shall we do if great tribulation come in our time?" Brother Giles answered, "If the Lord should make stones and rocks rain from heaven, they would not hurt us if we were what we should be. If a man were what he should be, evil would be changed into good for him. For just as good itself is twisted into evil for a man of ill will, so evil is changed into good for a man of good will. For all great good things and great bad things are within man, where they cannot be seen. The worst devils come running to us when we endure great infirmity, and great labor, and great hunger, and great insults. If you wish to be saved, do not ask that anyone should do justice to you. Holy men do good and suffer evil. If you know that you have offended the Lord your God, the Creator and Lord of all creatures, you should know that it is right that all should persecute you and avenge the offense that you have committed against your Lord. You ought to bear patiently the offenses and wrongs that are done to you, because you have no right to justice against anyone, since you deserve to be punished by all. It is a great virtue for a man to overcome himself. If you overcome yourself, you overcome all your enemies, and you attain all that is good. It would be great virtue if anyone let himself be overcome by men, because such a man would be the master of this world. If you wish to be saved, try not to hope for any consolation that any mortal creature can give you, because falls due to such consolations are greater and more frequent than those due to tribulations. It is a noble quality in a horse that, although it is running very fast, yet it can be turned by its rider from one road and directed into another. Thus, a man inflamed with anger ought to let himself be ruled by someone who corrects him. The mere remembrance of God ought to induce a man, as far as he is concerned, to pay others to give him slaps and blows and drag him around by the hair. Once, a certain friar was grumbling in his presence about some difficult order that had been given him, and the holy brother Giles said to him, "My friend, the more you grumble, the more you burden yourself, and the more devoutly and humbly you bow your head under the yoke of holy obedience, the lighter and sweeter it will be for you. You do not want to be blamed in this world, yet you want to be honored in the other. You do not want to be cursed, yet you want to be blessed. You do not want to labor, yet you want to rest. You are deceived, because through blame we come to honor. Through being cursed we obtain blessings, and through labor rest. The proverb is true. He who does not give what he is sorry to lose cannot have what he desires. Don't be surprised if your neighbor offends you sometimes, because even Martha, who was holy, wished to stir up the Lord against her own sister. But Martha complained unjustly against Mary, because the more Mary lost the use of her body, the more she worked than Martha, for she had lost speech, sight, hearing, taste, and movement. Try to be kind and good, and fight against vices, and bear tribulations and humiliations with patience, for there is nothing else to do but to overcome yourself, because it is a small thing for a man to draw souls to God unless he overcomes himself. 7. On holy solitude and watchfulness of heart. The lazy man loses this world and the other without doing any good to himself or others. It is impossible to acquire virtues without trouble and effort. If you can be safe, don't put yourself in danger. He who works for God and for the everlasting kingdom is safe. A young man who rejects work rejects the kingdom of heaven. If something is not worthwhile, then neglecting it does not matter or hurt, because if no good comes from it, the evil does no harm. Just as an evil idleness is a way to go to hell, so a holy idleness and quiet are a way to go to heaven. A man should be very careful to preserve the grace that God has given him, and to work faithfully with it. For men often lose the fruit for leaves and the grain for straws. God gives the fruit to some and allows them to do without the leaves, but to some he gives both, and some lack both. I think it is greater to preserve the good things that God gives than to acquire them. He who knows how to acquire them, but does not know how to store them up, will never grow rich. Yet to know how to store them up and not to know how to acquire them is not a great thing. Many acquire much, but do not grow rich because they do not guard what they have gained. And some gain bit by bit and grow rich because they guard well what they have. What a flood of water the Tiber River would collect if it did not keep flowing. Men ask God for a gift that has no measure and no limit, yet they want to serve him within a measure and limit. So he who wants to be loved and rewarded without limit should serve in love without measure and limit. Men fail to attain perfection because of their own negligence. Once, the holy brother Giles said to someone who wished to go to Rome, "When you are on the way, don't draw to yourself what you see, so that it does not hinder you, and learn how to prefer good money to false, for the enemy is very clever, and he has many hidden traps. Blessed is he who makes good use of his body for the love of Almighty God, and who does not seek any reward short of heaven." If a man was extremely poor and someone said to him, "Brother, you can have this thing of mine to put to good use for 3 days, and for this you will receive an unlimited treasure," would not that poor man, if he was sure this was true, eagerly strive to put that thing to good use? The thing which is loaned to us by God is our flesh, and the whole time of our work is like 3 days. So if you want to enjoy happiness, work at earning it. For if you don't work, how should you rest? If all the fields and vineyards in the world belonged to one man, and he did not cultivate them or have them cultivated, what produce would he get from them? But another man who had a small number of fields and vineyards and cultivated them well would get produce from them for himself and for many others. If someone wants to do wrong, he hardly asks for any advice, but when he wants to do something good, he tries to get advice from many. A common proverb says, "Don't put the pot on the fire near your neighbor's hedge." A man is not blessed if he has a will to do good, unless he tries to carry it out by doing good deeds, because that is why God gives men his grace, to put it into practice. Once, a man who it seems was a tramp said to the holy Brother Giles, "Brother Giles, give me the consolation of an alms." Brother Giles replied, "Try to live right, and you will have consolation. Unless a man prepares a place for God within himself, he will never find a place among the creatures of God. Who would not be willing to do what is better in this world, not only for his soul, but also for his body? Yet we are unwilling to do what is good for the soul or the body. I could swear to this truth, that he who makes the Lord's yoke lighter for himself makes it heavier, and he who makes it heavier makes it lighter. If only men would do what is best even for their body in this world. He who made the other world made this one, and he can give in this world the good things which he gives in the other. For the body feels the graces of the soul, because the good and evil of the soul have an effect on the body. Then a friar said to him, "Perhaps we will die before we know our own good and experience any good." Brother Giles answered, "Tanners know about skins, shoemakers about shoes, smiths about iron, and so on in other crafts. But how can a man know a craft he has never practiced? Do you think that great lords give great gifts to stupid and insane men? They do not. Just as good deeds are the way to all good, so evil deeds are the way to all evil. Blessed is he whom nothing under heaven shall disedify, and whom everything he shall see and hear or know shall edify, and who shall try to make good use of all things." 8. On contempt of the world. Woe to the man who gives his heart and desire and energy to the things of this world, and on their account gives up and loses the things that are of heaven and last forever. The high-flying eagle would not fly so high if it had one of the beams of St. Peter's Church tied to each wing. I find many people who work for their body and few who work for their soul. For many work for the body, breaking rocks, tunneling into mountains, and working in many other occupations that are hard on the body. But who labors so energetically and eagerly for his soul? A greedy man is like a mole that does not believe there is any treasure or any other good but to burrow into the ground and live in it. Yet there are other treasures that it does not know about. The birds of the air and the beasts of the earth and the fishes of the sea are satisfied when they have enough food for themselves. But since man is not satisfied with the things of this world and always longs for others, it is clear that he was not made primarily for those, but for others. For the body was made for the sake of the soul, and this world for the sake of the other world. This world is this kind of field. He who has a larger part of it has the worst part. He also used to say that St. Francis did not like the ants very much because they were too anxious about collecting their food, but he liked the birds more because they do not gather into barns. 9. On holy chastity. Our flesh is like a hog that runs eagerly into the mud and enjoys being in the mud. The flesh is like the insect that always likes to wallow in the dung of horses. Our flesh is the devil's boxer. Our flesh is the devil's forest. The devil does not give up hope to get a man as long as he sees that he has flesh. A man who has a borrowed animal makes as much use of it as he can. That is what we ought to do with the body. It is impossible for a man to attain to grace unless he gives up sensuality. Although a man who has an animal makes it work hard, carrying heavy burdens, and although he feeds it well, still it will not go along the road right without being guided by a rod. That is the way it is with the body of a man who does penance. A friar said, "How can we protect ourselves from the vices of the flesh?" The holy brother Giles answered him, "He who wants to move big rocks and large beams tries to move them more by skill than by strength, and we must proceed in the same way in this case. Every vice wounds chastity, for chastity is like a clear mirror that can be obscured by just breathing on it. It is impossible for a man to come to the grace of God while he takes pleasure in sensual things. So you can turn this way and that, up and down, to one side and the other, but there is nothing else to do than to fight against the flesh that wishes to betray you day and night. He who overcomes it overcomes all his enemies and attains all that is good." He also used to say, "Among all the other virtues, I would give first place to holy chastity." A friar said to him, "Isn't charity a greater virtue than chastity?" The holy brother Giles answered him, "And what is more chaste than charity?" And he often used to say, singing, "O holy chastity, what are you? What are you? You are such and such. You are such and so great that foolish people do not know what you are and how great you are." A friar said to him, "What do you mean by chastity?" Brother Giles replied, "By chastity, I mean to keep guard over all the senses with the grace of God." Once, when Brother Giles was praising chastity very much, a married man came up and said to him, "I keep away from all women except my wife. Is that enough for me to do?" He answered, "Don't you think a man can get drunk on the wine in his own glass?" He said, "Yes, he can." And the holy brother Giles said, "That is the way it is in this case." Someone else said to him, "Brother Giles, the apostle seems to mean only a widow when he says, 'She who gives herself up to pleasure is dead while she is still alive.'" Brother Giles answered him, "Although that saying may refer to widows, still that saying applies wherever it applies." And the holy brother Giles said to those who were standing around, "Some land that has not been farmed for a long time, where many thorns and such things have grown, and now is almost like a forest, it is a very hard job to dig there. So it is with an unhappy sinner who has spent a long time in sin and is full of vices. A great deal of work in preaching and discussing has to be spent on him before you can lead him to the road to salvation and good works." After that he said, "Just look, O man, at what you love and why you love it. Heaven or earth, the creator or the creature, light or darkness, the flesh or the spirit, good or evil. And then you will be better able to separate the good from the bad and see what you ought to love and what you ought to hate." 10. On resisting temptations. Great grace cannot be possessed in peace because many conflicts always arise against it. The more grace a man has, the more the devil attacks him. But a man should not, on that account, stop being guided by his grace, because the harder the battle, the greater will his crown be, if he wins. But we do not have many hindrances because we are not what we should be. Yet if someone walked well in the way of the Lord, he would not feel tired or bored, but in the way of the world he feels tired and bored to death. A friar answered, "You seem to be saying two things that contradict each other." The holy brother Giles replied, "Don't the devils run after a man of good will more than after the others? That is a hindrance. And if a man sold his cheap merchandise for 1,000 times more than it was worth, would he feel tired? Now the contradiction is solved. So I say that the more virtue a man has, the more he is pursued by vices, and he must hate them all the more. You gain virtue from every vice that you conquer, and you will receive a greater reward from the vice that troubles you most, if you conquer it. Whatever may be the reason for which a man fails to walk in the Lord's way, that is the cause of his losing his reward. Someone said to him, "I am often tempted by the worst kind of temptation, and I have often asked the Lord to take it away from me, and he does not take it away." The holy brother Giles answered him, "The better the armor with which a king arms his soldiers, the more bravely he wants them to fight." Then a friar asked him, "What can I do to willingly What can I do to go willingly to prayer when I feel dry and lacking in devotion? He replied, Suppose a king has 2 servants, one of whom is armed, but the other is unarmed, and they have to go to war. The one who is armed goes bravely to war, but the other, who is unarmed, says this to his lord, My lord, as you see, I have no weapons, but because I love you, I will go into battle even without weapons. Now the king, on seeing the faithfulness of that servant, says to his attendants, Go and prepare armor to adorn this faithful servant of mine, and place on him the emblem of my own armor. So too, if someone goes into battle of prayer as if without arms, because he feels dry and lacking devotion, God sees his faithfulness and places the emblem of his armor on him. With temptations, it is as sometimes happens to a farmer who sees a forest of trees and briars on a section of his land which he wants to cultivate and sow with grains, but he is exhausted with much labor and sweating and trouble before he can gather any grain there, and at times he is almost sorry he undertook the job on account of the work and worry it brings him. For first, he sees the forest that has to be cleared of shrubs, but he sees no grain. Second, he works hard and cuts down the trees and extracts the root of the trees, but he does not see the grain. Third, he breaks up the soil and prepares it, but he does not see the wheat for which he is working so much. Fourth, he plows the soil again. Fifth, he sows it. Sixth, he weeds it. Seventh, he reaps it. Eighth, he threshes it, and he works very hard at all those things. Ninth, he stores it away with great joy, almost forgetting all the labor because of the rich harvest that he finally obtains from it. And he endures many other labors besides these, and he blesses them all on account of the joy that the sight of the good harvest brings him. Again someone said to him, What can I do? For if I do not do any good, I become vain about it, and if I do bad, I am depressed and almost fall into despair. The holy brother Giles answered, You do right in grieving for your sin. However, I advise you to grieve moderately, for you must always believe that God's power to forgive is greater than your power to sin. If God has mercy on some great sinner, do you think he abandons a smaller sinner? But don't stop doing good because of the temptation to vanity. For if a farmer wishing to throw seed on the ground says to himself, I don't want to sow this year because if I sow, birds may come and eat that seed, and if therefore he does not sow, he would not have any produce from his land to eat. But if he sows, although some of the seed perishes, still he will have most of it. That is the way it is with the man who is tempted to vanity and fights against it. A friar said to Brother Giles, It is written of St. Bernard that he once said the 7th penitential psalms and did not think of anything but what he was saying. The holy Brother Giles answered, I think it is a greater thing if an armed camp is strongly attacked and the sentinel of the camp defends himself manfully and bravely.